This was not our bedroom, yet it was clearly Alexander's. It was visible in the choice of furniture and the energy of the room. The colors chosen for the walls could only remind me of him, and his scent clung to the sheets around me. Whoever was pacing outside the room, however, hadn't stopped doing so, but hadn't come in either. Did that mean they were unaware that I woke up? Or was it Alexander? I stiffly climbed out of the bed and threw open the old, heavy wardrobe situated in the corner. It was filled with my own clothes. Someone had taken the care to fold and hang them in neat order. Clearly, we would be staying here now on a more permanent basis. I didn't have to guess to know that these were Alexander's rooms in his so-called stronghold. I quickly selected a pair of practical jeans and a long-sleeve shirt in a dark, warm brown color that matched my eyes. Getting dressed and washed in the ensuite bathroom, I was in a hurry, anxious to get started on the search for Andy. It was the only thing on my mind now. There wasn't even place to worry about poor Danis's arm. I was sure that Alexander was also focused with single-minded determination on finding him. In fact, he'd probably blame himself for it in the first place. I wanted to go to him and at least reassure him that I knew it wasn't his fault yet. Somewhere I wasn't sure. If he really hadn't left enough people to guard Andy, we'd both known that it was something in Andy, a talent that the demon desired. I was just making my way to the door, ready to barge down whoever was pacing in front of it and force my way into the search. A sharp pain shot through my body, radiating out from my heart. For a moment, I thought I was having a heart attack. Then the pain subsided and I became aware of another sensation. How did this happen? Only one thing came to mind. Fort. It was him that had taken Andy, and it was him that shielded me from the others. I could suddenly feel the simmering anger that had followed the pain, beating and pulsing through my head. I wasn't sure if that was supposed to happen, but it had drawn my attention to the thin but tenuous line between my mind and his. He'd somehow been injured. It had been his heart hurting, as if being squeezed by an unseen force. It was his anger filling me now, and I trembled with the intensity of it. Of course we had to be connected somehow, if he were to shield me. A faint hope bloomed inside of me, but I was careful to keep it hidden in a corner of my own mind, drawing up those thick metal walls around it and my thoughts, the same ones I'd once tried on Alexander, but that had given me a headache at the time. Now I felt no pain, and the walls slid into place easily. It wasn't hard even to put up some token, distraction thoughts and feelings on the outside, in case Fort was in fact able to see inside my head through that connection. I didn't want to tip him off. He'd been injured, or at least hurt, or I wouldn't have felt that, so something had happened. For a moment, I hoped it had been Alexander freeing Andy, but then I realized that was foolish. Alexander wouldn't leave Fort alive. I sat down on the bed again, certain I could find out where they were somehow. Closing my eyes, I searched carefully from behind the safety of the freshly made walls, and soon I'd found what I was looking for. There, the connection. Faint and small, concealed and camouflaged, but definitely there. Once I'd found it, it wasn't difficult to follow. I felt like a bloodhound on a trail as I raced along the thin line of energy, jumping from mind to mind almost, as if he'd tried very hard to hide his trail. It was red hot to me though, glowing and alive and so clear now that the image of it seemed burned into my memory. It was seething in red, anger and pain. Whoever had hurt Fort had made finding him easy. Then I hit a wall, shielded like my own mind had carefully been, Fort's mind. I couldn't see into his head, didn't even know how to exactly. I'd never done anything like this before, and I'd certainly never heard anyone talk in detail about it either. I circled the shields. It wasn't really circling because there was no clear mental picture of the shape and size of it yet. It felt like I was walking around the edges of his mind, making several loops to make certain I didn't miss a thing. There were no cracks and fissures. I didn't give up though, but tried again and again to find a weakness, a glimpse, anything. Suddenly the walls flashed red, then that same pain from before seemed to crush my heart again. I felt my body crumble onto the bed, but at the same time the walls of Fort's mind flickered. I had no time to hesitate, and, through the red haze of pain, I hurriedly slipped through. Immediately, vision, not my own, assaulted me, and the pain seemed to intensify tenfold. It was painful to move, to breath, and even to think. I was looking at a hardwood floor covered with dirt, and I was leaning on my hands, panting out breaths between clenched teeth. They were big hands, male hands, and I knew instantly that they were Fort's. My vision swam and my ears were ringing. The pain was only getting worse, and it was so very hard to focus. I heard myself curse in Fort's voice. "You little son of a bitch. Cut that out." My head tilted upwards to show me the image of a rusty cage, big enough to hold a decent-sized dog or a small child. Andy, dirt-streaked and scared, his chubby face tear-stained, looked out at me. It was clear he was in intense pain, yet he also looked extremely focused. I wanted to scan him for injuries, but my vision moved again. I was getting to my feet now, and the pain was, although still intense, slowly subsiding. Standing up was still a task, and I stumbled multiple times as I made my way towards the door, swerving as if I was drunk. "It's that Rain wants you alive," I grated out, "or I'd have long since killed you. Spoiled brat." With those parting words, I swung open the door and stepped outside. As it banged shut behind me, I breathed in deeply. Immediately the pain abated, slowly fading away, and this time, it seemed without leaving that red-hot trace behind. No burning in my veins that made moving an agony, or breathing a task. For a fraction of a second, I was still for it, staring out across a forest within the distance the village of Riverwood, home to Westtown High and the Clitton residents. Then my mind was disconnected, and I was myself again, rapidly being pulled away and shut out by the shields that were slamming into place around Fort's mind. Where were they? I hadn't been able to see enough landmarks to know in which direction around the village the cabin had been located. The knowledge surfaced, like before when I searched the minds of the dead bodies of that crony, of Thornton, and the mind of Chumali. A cottage, built on a rocky outcrop with a single access road. Fort knew the forest so well that he needed no roads to escape if necessary. In the forest, he'd be anything but trapped. I slammed into my own body with such force that for a moment every single nerve ending seemed to scream with awareness. Then my throat burned so violently that my stomach rebelled. I tumbled out of the bed, but hadn't staggered more than 2 steps towards the bathroom when I gagged. My knees gave way and I crashed to the floor, puking and gagging until my body heaved over and over again, yet nothing came. My midriff was so cramped up that the pain, although located differently, almost came close to the heart attack feeling of before. The room was spinning around me so rapidly that I feared I'd get dizzy from it and start throwing up all over again. My forehead was touched with something cool, a wet washcloth, and I felt a big male hand running up and down my back in a soothing manner. For a moment I thought it was Alexander, but as I blinked and looked up through eyes, blurry with tears, I came face to face with Lysander. I nearly screamed in surprise, but only a shocked gasp escaped my laboring throat. His ever so aristocratic face had been softened by compassion now, and it made for a weird combination. This man was anything but Compassio Alex as far as I'd been aware. But it seemed I had been wrong. He held the washcloth in slender fingers and without hesitation wiped my mouth with it, dabbing until he was certain I was clean. Then the cloth simply disappeared, and so did the evidence of my upset stomach, not even leaving a stain on the pristine cream-colored carpet. The next second he held a crystal-clear glass filled to the brim with sparkling water, offering it to me so I could wash the foul taste from my mouth. I swallowed greedily and was just about to offer him my thanks when it hit me. The name of the rocky outcrop the cottage had been built on, Shadow Peak. I did croquet. I was hired into the 6% of crop, which I did this up and was make it out a 6. Thankfully, Lysander seemed to understand what I wanted and grabbed my elbow to steer me in the right direction. He walked so fast that I nearly had to run to keep up with him. But not once did I ask him to slow down for me. Although I'd never been here before, I hardly paid any attention to the new surroundings. They were a vague blur. I was sure the decorations were as exquisite as the ones in the house in Riverwood, yet they were completely lost on me right now. Then 2 big wooden doors appeared in front of me, and they slammed open by an unseen force, banging loudly against the walls. Inside, I found Alexander pacing a groove into the floor, and Saratin talking to him in an unfamiliar language. The words a long stream that seemed to have no spaces or ends. My mate seemed to understand, and barked back orders in Gaelic, his voice harsher than I'd ever heard him before. Not even when that vampire had once nearly bitten me, the incident now seemed like ages ago. As Alexander turned on the spot furthest away from me and started pacing back the way he'd come, he spotted me. In a flash, he was next to me, gathering me in his arms and crushing me to his strong chest with arms like bands of iron. "Oh, Britt," he groaned, and I didn't even need our bond to sense the pain, guilt, and despair. He was desperate and scared, and it made fear a live thing skittering around inside my gut. "Shadow Peak," I said into his chest, my voice slightly muffled but still clear to everyone present. "That's where Andy is right now." For a moment there was silence. Then Alexander asked, "You are certain? How do you know?" He sounded incredibly hopeful now, but over his shoulder I got, "See Saratin," a disbelieving look on his features. "Fort is still shielding me, suppressing our bond." I followed him back to his mind and gleaned the information from him. I explained. He was in extreme pain at the time. It left him vulnerable. Surprisingly, Lysander added, "It's true, I could feel the mind surge through the door." He passed me a look that told me he knew I'd been in great pain too, but he didn't mention it. For a moment there, I thought there was even a flicker of respect in those black eyes of his. Alexander let go of me and stepped back, then hurriedly slipped his weapons back into their sheaths. He was still wearing the exact same armor from before. In fact, he was still covered in the blood and grime and blue paint. Clearly, he hadn't taken a single moment since to freshen up. "Saratin, gather a force and meet me there." He swung around to Lysander. "You stay here and guard Brittany." He was out the door before anyone could utter a word. Yet in passing me, he brushed his fingers softly across my cheek. Then it sunk in that he wasn't taking me, that he'd left me here while he risked his life all alone to save Andy. "Damn it!" I exclaimed angrily, whirling around. I punched the desk with my fist, surprised when a dent actually formed in the hard wood and drinking in the sharp pain that shot up my arm. Saratin just bowed to me once, and then also left the room, moving off to gather a backup force for Alexander. I had to go with them. I had to. It was my only chance to help free Andy. He'd be terrified all alone and wasn't going to sit still and do nothing. I stopped Saratin by calling out his name, and he froze in his tracks. "Take me with you when you leave to join Alexander." The dark man seemed to consider this for a moment, but then slowly shook his head. "No, he wants you to stay here. He only said Lysander had to protect me." I argued, but the scarred warrior shook his head again and left without another word. Another curse escaped me as I turned to look at my guard, the dragon that I knew had come to my rescue when I'd been captured, yet that seemed to have despised me from the start, simply because I was human. The Greek man raised his hands defensively and said, "Oh no, Brittany. He told me to stay hurry and protect you. I'm not taking you anywhere. Alex would have my skin if you got hurt. Andy will need me." I tried to reason with him, but I knew it was useless. So, I changed tack. "How are Sarah and Dennis doing?" Lysander looked relieved by my question and answered in a rush. "Sarah is fine. She's working hard on repairs and healing in the inframanda. She's unable to sit still and watch Tonextic work on Dennis's arm." He paused and then added, "Lenextic says he can't give him back his old arm, but with time he'll be able to make a proper prosthesis." Feeling a momentary stab of guilt about the injuries and the pain many had to endure, including my friends for my sake and that of Andy, I knew it was inevitable that this was the way things went when others jockey for power, like Thornton and his son and the demon Rame. I gently asked him how many had been injured or killed in the past fights. The question made Lysander frown. "All the warriors that remained with Andy have been killed, and 2 at the house at which you were held." There was a pause before he added ever so softly, "One that died for Andy was a cousin of mine. Also a dragon, although not Dracos. Alexander did not leave your brother without proper protection. Dennis was supposed to teleport the boy here, the stronghold, but a spell prevented them from doing so and cut them off from the outside world." That was one of the longest things I'd ever heard him say, and a sudden spike of warmth suffused me for the regal Dracos. He'd been an ass before, but he was trying hard to be nice now, and he even seemed somewhat on my side, showing a sense of empathy and insight. It had been clear from the moment he'd showed up at my side after I woke up that he'd been trying to help, bringing me towards Alexander without my asking and backing me up when it seemed for a moment they didn't believe me when I explained how I'd gotten the information. Reaching up, I softly stroked his slightly stubbled cheek, remembering that shifters were very tactile creatures. For a moment, his eyelids closed, creating black crescents on his cheeks with their long, dark lashes. "You're a good man, Lysander," I whispered softly. His lips quirked, and then he smiled gently. I'll take you to see Danis, Mrs. Clitton. A smirk told me he was teasing, and then he took hold of my elbow and dragged me through the building. A plan was slowly forming in my head at the same time. If only I knew for certain it would work, yet too much still depended on variables I couldn't account for. Lysander soon paused in front of a door and knocked softly. There was no reply yet. He swung open the door anyway. It was very dark in the room, except for a candle burning beside a bed. There were no windows. Danis was lying on the bed, looking like a smug, spoiled prince enthroned on pillows and covered beneath blankets. Food piled up on a platter beside him and just in reach of his hand. He smiled the moment he saw me, but I could tell he was in great pain. The real light came from Telenextic, however. The archangel stood beside Danis, his hands hovering above the space where the witch's arm should have been. A golden shimmering was visible beneath his hands. His wings he'd spread out behind him like a great wall of light, the single candle in the room turning his wings the color of dawn. It was a stunning sight, and it had to be even more impressive from where Danis was sitting. He was nearly surrounded by the light. "Brittany," Danis exclaimed. He sounded cheerful, but I could tell it was forced. Telenextic gave no sign that he'd seen us, remaining utterly focused on what he was doing. Then the witch, having found his voice, yelled, "God damn it! That hurts." Telenextic's face remained impassive, but then the golden shimmer disappeared and he folded his hands together. "I think I have all the measurements and information I need now." Danis shifted his body around on the pillows and said, very fervently, "Thank the heavens." "Seritin informed me that you found the location of my grandson," the archangel stated, while folding his wings tightly along his body. For a moment I saw a flash again of Telenextic strapped down to that black granite pole and naked, his wings cut from his body, and the white feathers a bloody mass scattered around him. Then the image was gone again, and I focused on his words, anxiously nodding. "Yes, Alexander went off half-cocked on his own to save him. I knew I would have done the same had I been able to. Yet now it seemed like a very foolish move. I didn't know if Fort was there alone with Andy, or if there was more troops waiting outside. I had to get there, and quick. Was Alexander already there now? Fighting? Bleeding? Injured, or maybe victorious? Did he have someone else who could teleport him, or did he have to run there? Or drive? How far was the stronghold even from Riverwood? I knew the at-will teleportation, the way Danis could, was an extremely rare talent. One that occurred in maybe 1 or 2 witches per generation on the entire world. It was unlike that there was another teleporter at Alexander's disposal, especially since I knew that Thornton had one in his service. "How are you feeling, Danis?" I asked, reaching out to touch his leg. He pulled a face and then said, "I'd be fine if not for those measurements for the prosthesis." He cast a careful, guarded look towards my grandfather, clearly intimidated. It drove Sarah insane, so I sent her away to do something to distract her. He straightened his shoulders, and this time it was a slightly accusing, dark look. He cast the archangel, as if he blamed him for this. "Sarah is all right?" I asked, remembering only too clearly the horrible state she'd been in. The stake piercing her torso and the silver netting, cutting and burning across her body. That gaping hole when Telenextic pulled out the stake, I felt so incredibly bad for the suffering my friends had to endure. I didn't think I'd ever be able to repay them for this. The knowledge that Sarah had even asked me for my forgiveness for failing. I shivered at the thought. She had nothing to apologize for. It was me that should be apologizing for bringing this danger to her and her mate. Danis smiled a genuine smile, unaware of my inner turmoil. Oh yes. She was beyond furious that Alex wouldn't let her out to help search with the others. I nodded. I heard she was helping in the inn for Amanda now. Yes, she's trying to stay busy. A frown. I just don't understand how Fort can do all this. He never used to be this powerful despite his alpha lineage. Casting a look at Telenextic, who was running his eyes up and down my body as if to ensure himself I was unharmed, and Lysander, who was guarding the door. I explained my theory about this. The demon, Raim, can take powers, right? I noted that they were all 3 listening intently to me now. I think he can also give them away again. Probably only temporarily, though. I doubt he'd be willing to part with power on a permanent basis. I paused before continuing. Fort mind controlled me to get into the car. Yet since then, he hasn't done anything like this again. Plus, if he'd been able to do this before, No doubt he would have used it when he tried to rape me. At my words, an angry hiss escaped from Lysander's throat. I wasn't sure, but it seemed to me Telenextic tensed as well. With my fragile connection to him shielded, I had no way of telling. Same goes for the shielding he's using to mute my bond with Alexander. I don't think he has complete control over this talent. Or, I wouldn't have been able to slip in when he was in pain. The shields were something he had to consciously think off to do. I looked around at the others in the room, trying to convey the urgency of my next words. We have to get Alexander help as soon as possible. There is no way of knowing just how powerful 4 is right now. Damn, was all Danis said as he sifted around again, clearly feeling uncomfortable although he was no longer in pain. The silence stretched for a moment, and then Telenextic shrugged as if he could care less. Boy, you can teleport. You can even take someone with you. Was that my imagination, or did his eyes really darted to me briefly when he said, someone? But don't even think about fighting or leaving this bed. The warning was a fierce one, and after a dramatic pause in which he fixed Danis with a dark look, he turned to me. Take care, my little Gelatli, he said, stroking my cheek with gentle, elegant fingers. I felt a wave of heat wash over me, and I was instantly rejuvenated by it, feeling stronger and more alive and aware than I had before. Even the burning in my throat seemed to subside for a moment, although it had been a constant factor ever since the injury had been inflicted on me. Lysander hissed again. What did you do? He'd stepped in closer to me, so he was close enough to brush my back with his shoulder. Telenextic only pinned him with a very frosty look. I'm lending my granddaughter some power. Dragos. He let go off me then and stepped closer to the shapeshifter. Thank you, Ea, I said, hoping to diffuse the situation. It was in vain, it seemed. A word, the archangel said, no inflection whatsoever to his voice. Lysander allowed himself to be pulled away, walking along with my grandfather towards the door. His back now turned to me and Danis. I cast a look at the witch, my eyes automatically shifting towards the heavy candlestick that held the single candle that burned to ease the darkness. Turning back, I saw Telenextic stepping out of the room, Lysander standing in the door opening with his back still towards me. I hardly thought about what I was about to do, simply leaping across the room to snatch up the candlestick. Danis gasped in shock as I darted towards the Dracos, my improvised weapon raised high like a club and the room flickering as the burning candle fell to the floor. I swung it full force, not holding back one bit. I knew that if I didn't use all my strength, I might never knock him out. Besides, the one hit would not kill a dragon. His skull had to be a lot stronger and thicker than that of a human. I just hoped it would knock him out long enough for me to get a head start to get to Alexander and save Andy. Or, they'd surely get me lock me up in here somewhere. Lysander was just turning and closing the door as I screamed, "Forgive me." That's when the candlestick connected to the side of his head, and the candle hit the floor, plunging the room into darkness. For a moment I could still see clearly. Shock and bewilderment flashed across his features, and then he slowly started falling sideways. Then the light gone, all I saw was the slightly open door, a sliver of brilliant light falling through it. Lysander hit the floor with a loud, heavy thud, and I could hear him exclaim something even as he lost consciousness. What the? Eyes rolling back into his head, the white of it reflecting the light from the hallway, he passed out. Fuck, Danis finished lamely, light at that instant jumping to life around the room, obviously a spell he'd cast. Through the door, still opened a crack, I saw one topaz-colored eye and half a smirk. Telenextic's voice drifted through with a little humor in it. I'll pretend I didn't see that. Now hurry and help Andy. With a nod, he closed the door, and I spun around to look at Danis. You need to teleport me to Shadow Peak near Riverwood. Do you know where it is? He was staring at Lysander's prone form on the floor, though, with his mouth hanging open. I cast the dragon a look and realized I'd managed to trap him between forms again. All visible skin covered with black shiny scales, his hair gone to make place for silver and black ridges and horns, while his body was bending and warping, but not really growing to accommodate for his dragon size. Danis, can you? I stepped up next to the bed beside him and grabbed his remaining hand. You will need to teleport back here as soon as possible and get Lysander help, I said, for both Lysander's benefit and Danis's. I didn't want him to stay to help me and run the risk of getting hurt. Again. Shadow peek? Was all he asked for confirmation. My car came slipping and sliding to a stop in front of Galen's house. The gravel crunching loudly under the tires and a dust cloud thick enough to hide the forest behind me. I think I made enough noise to scare of the entire forest animal population. I didn't care. On the porch of the old, cozy-looking cottage, with its petunias and other splashes of colorful flowers surrounding the place, stood a very old witch. This was Galen. Although retired, he was the nearest alive teleporter that I knew of. When he was younger, he'd been a dedicated and Passio Alex warrior and even friend. Now he was old and crippled. One eye a milky white, blinded by age. The other eye, a sharp blue that always gave me the feeling he saw right through me. That was the trouble with witches. You never knew if they truly did or did not. Their magic often so different now, a days from mine, that I couldn't always sense it. It was worse for many others because in my veins ran the blood of witches. I had always been able to sense more than most. Galen had always been the one capable of cooling me down when I needed it. Not today, though. There was no way anyone could talk me out of rushing to free Andy. There was too many risks in leaving the boy in enemy hands any longer. At any given time, the demon could show up and kill him, devouring his talents and powers. That was an unforgivable and unacceptable thing. I would not allow it. Today, all I needed from Galen was a single teleport, a one-way trip to Shadow Peak. My only objective was to get to Andy and teleport him to the stronghold myself. My teleportation powers were extremely limited, but Andy was small. It would have to be enough. I would not jeopardize Dennis again. Not when my sister would stand to lose so much with his death. Already the loss of his limb weighed heavily on my conscience. He had to recuperate first. I couldn't allow him to die from exhaustion from teleporting people because he wasn't fully healed. Jumping out of the car, I rushed up the porch, but all Galen said was, "Where to my friend?" Lifting one bony hand so I could grab it. For once, he didn't spend time persuading me to do something else, something more rational. Shadow Peak? Ash, Shadow Peak. Igers. The world around me solidified into trees and rocks, a blue sky overhead, and the scent and sound of the forest in the air. I breathed in deeply, filtering the air to pick up the scent of either Fort or Andy. Behind me, Galen called out gently, "Alex, it's not your fault. You left behind a dragon to protect a boy that wasn't even supposed to stay there. You couldn't have known that one of the Galamut had been freed." I whirled around to face Galen. I failed Gale. 7 men lost their lives. My sister's mate lost an arm. Andy was taken. I felt my blood boil at the thought of my own stupidity. I'd allowed myself to be tricked with my blind rage towards Brittany's kidnapping. It was unforgivable. As if he knew my thoughts, Galen echoed, "Don't go in there blindly again. You do not know what is waiting for you." The nearly blind witch nodded towards the high rock outcrop looming above us. Somewhere on top of that rock stood an old and abandoned cottage, and in it was a cage with Andy. It was well possible that the demon was there too. Ryum, was he already preparing Andy to take his life and his power? "I have to try," I said as I cast a look at my old friend. "Seritin is coming with backup soon." I started at a lope towards the rock face, thinking to scale it with ease and hopefully surprise the wolf. It appeared I'd be downwind from this angle. "Seritin and your troops have no teleporters. They will be too late." I heard from behind me, but I ignored his warning. I knew they'd be much too late if things went wrong, yet I didn't know where or in which state Ryum was. At the worst, he was already there. He'd have to go over my dead body before he harmed Andy. I cast one look up at the looming rocks above me, then easily jumped for the nearest ledge and started scaling them, reaching the top in no time, making light work of the rocks and jumps and ledges. I waited there, not slipping over the edge before I knew what was waiting for me out there. Suspended in the air, hanging from my arms from the edge, I allowed my senses to expand and my breathing to ease. Listening, smelling, and feeling, I took my time to canvass the rock outcrops stretching out before and above me, yet all was quiet. So quiet, in fact, that for a moment I feared Brittany had been wrong about the location. That's when I heard the distinct, slightly too slow heartbeat and even breathing I had learned to recognize as Andy's. It had to be a trap. I knew it, but I had no way to avoid it. I just had to let it spring close around me and hope that being aware would be enough. that it would give me just the edge I needed to survive and bring Andy home. Brahim had no heartbeat that I could hear, which meant he could be there with Andy right now while I waited here. Yet it was comforting to hear that Andy's heartbeat was even and slow. Not too slow for him yet, slow enough to indicate that he wasn't terrified. I spent more precious seconds hanging from my arms like a fly on the wall, just below the edge. Brittany had said that she'd been able to trace Fort only because he'd been in severe pain. I could only assume this meant someone more powerful was present. The question was, who? Certain I would get no wiser from hanging there, I'd pulled myself up so I could look out across the plateau. It was larger than I expected it to be, with the cottage almost 300 feet high. Back from the edge and fir trees and boulders scattered about. There was no living soul in sight, but still I was careful when I pulled myself up and onto the plateau completely. It was a good thing too. I'd only barely set foot onto the solid ground when blue exploded all around me. The freezing cold yet burning at the same time kind of blue that indicated a frost demon or water demon of some sort. A solid kick which seemed to come out of nowhere landed on my chest a fraction of a second later. It knocked the air right out of me and sent me flying over the edge. Only because I'd been prepared did I manage to respond appropriately, drawing both my blades as I flew backwards and upwards into the sky. Then, just as I started falling down, I used my power to fling myself back onto my opponent, fire trailing in my wake. On the plateau stood something akin to a human, tall and graceful and distinctly feminine with curves and flowing lines. A white, wispy dress flowing around her long limbs in the air currents around her, while hair, the color of polished sapphire, whirled around her. Her skin was a chalky white, and although her face was strikingly attractive in a surreal way, it displayed horns, proudly standing on her forehead like a crown. At the sight of her, my belly chilled, a frost Galamet. 2 Galamet on free foot? This was terrifying news. I had to destroy this one. Yet, I was not certain that I could. Had it been the same Galamet that had attacked the house in Riverwood and taken Andy, I wouldn't have been worried. He was a fire demon and I was immune to his powers. This one was frost and water. It meant I had to use talents hardly developed, the power's weakest. She was laughing evilly, as if she knew just what I'd been thinking. My attack was slow and I knew this. Coming in from so high, she had plenty of time to consider what to do. I was only a few feet away when she raised her hands towards me. The wrists pressed together and her hands opened, something blue gathering in between her palms. It seemed like slow motion as I neared her and the beam of ice shot up towards me. I dropped like a brick, with the grace of 1-2, rolling to avoid the shards of ice. With my blades, I slashed at her legs and upward to her torso. They met only thin air, the Galamet vaporizing and blowing away on an air current, disappearing like a fata morgana.